This is Bob Tobias, and I'm incredibly pleased to be here today. I really miss being with public servants like all of you who are struggling to do your job and accomplish your agency's mission under these incredibly challenging, very fast changing conditions. Every day is something new. Every day is another serving of stress. And all of that is compounded by the stress of struggling to stay healthy and supporting your family and friends who are also struggling to stay healthy. And I'm sure that there are persons on this call who know others who have been sick and perhaps know those who have died. So the sorrow and the grief are with us all. We're living in a profoundly difficult time. Given all of that, I'm especially grateful you chose to sign up and be present so we can be here together today. So I invite you for the next 1.5 hours or so to, if you can, step out of your current world and into the safe learning world of the Key program. Please consider the next time together as an oasis of free water and unconditional love and support, a place where you can hopefully have some new thoughts, some new insights, and some new energy. Today, we're going to be discussing the courage we need to act with integrity. Now, we often hear those words, but what do they mean? And more importantly, what do they mean to you? What is integrity? I might have a vague idea, but what does it really mean? What does courage mean? We know what it means in the movies, but what does it mean in our daily personal and professional lives? We'll also discuss how we might choose to develop courage through the regular conscious development of our courage muscle. And finally, when you develop that courage muscle, how will you choose to use it? And what will you choose it for? So this slide merely represents the material that I used to prepare this presentation. And I just want to let you know where it is. These are all good books, and I recommend them all. So our path today will have 5 stops on it. We will be defining integrity and courage. We're going to be exploring the interrelationship between courage and becoming our authentic self. We'll be exploring the interrelationship between courage and trusting ourselves and trusting others. We're going to be exploring the interrelationship between courage and the ability to hold our attention and stay in the present, stay in the game, rather than rushing to a decision to fight or flee. And finally, we're going to be examining the courage to take time to reflect, the courage to stop and sit with your thoughts and sit with your feelings for more than a minute. So we're going to start with definitions of integrity and courage. So what is integrity? A person of integrity maintains a consistent commitment to do what is right, as defined by his or her values, assumptions, beliefs, and expectations in the face of pressure, stress, and personal cost. For example, embarrassment is a cost, and certainly a larger cost is the loss of a job or some friends, or to suffer some criticism. All of these are costs of acting with integrity. A person of integrity is willing to fully explain why they chose to act as they have. They don't just act, they explain it so that those who are followers understand the context and the rationale for the act of integrity. Now, integrity occurs when we use a conscious decision-making process to both understand and act on our values, assumptions, beliefs, and expectations, rather than act on an unconscious and in an automatic reaction to a set of circumstances. The link between integrity and courage is the willingness to do the right thing despite the probable costs or risk, and no matter the doubts or temptation. So, what are my values and assumptions, beliefs, and expectations? Our VAEs include a person's deep-rooted systems of beliefs that are the foundations for determining right and wrong. And those VAEs those are the VAEs that consciously or unconsciously drive behavior. The more of our VAEs that are known to us or conscious to us, the more control we have over our behavior. If our VAEs are known to us, conscious to us, we can choose to follow our VAEs, or we can choose to change our VAEs and take a different path. So, courage. What is courage? Interestingly enough, courage is defined in the Cambridge Dictionary as, quote, the ability to control your fear in a dangerous or difficult situation, close quote. Now, the Oxford Dictionary defines courage in much the same way as, quote, the ability to do something that frightens one. Bravery and strength in the face of pain and grief, close quote. Now, we know of much public service bravery. Senator John McCain, who made the choice to refuse a release from a Vietnam prison until all of his colleagues who were also prisoners were released. And he did that knowing he would suffer an unknown additional period of time in that prison being tortured. Marie Yovanovitch, Fiona Hill, Bill Taylor, and Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman all made the choice to testify during the impeachment trial of President Trump, knowing they could lose their job, be publicly vilified, and subject to personal harm. Michael Atkinson, the Inspector General of the Intelligence Committee, risked discharge when he processed the whistleblower complaint that started the congressional inquiry, leading to President Trump's impeachment. And Navy Captain Crozier risked discharge when he publicly asked for assistance for his crew facing a COVID-19 epidemic on his ship. But interestingly enough, the root of the word courage is cor, the Latin word for heart. In one of its earliest forms, the word courage meant to speak one's mind by telling one's heart. This definition recognizes the inner strength it takes to speak honestly and openly. This definition addresses your willingness to speak your truth. Those public servants spoke their mind and told their heart and spoke their truth. Now, there are four kinds of courage. We only think often of physical courage, which is the willingness, as I've been discussing, to risk or endure an unpredictable measure of pain. But there's also moral courage, which is the righting of wrongs, taking the risk to speak truth to power, demand change, and face consequences. Rosa Parks, Nelson Mandela, and the man who, in a business meeting with several men and one woman who was being bullied, stands up and calls the bullier out. That's moral courage. It provides us with the will to persevere when we want to quit. There's also social courage, and that is when we choose to be vulnerable for the sake of relating to others with and our authentic presence. It means overcoming shame and risking loss, grief, embarrassment, sorrow, or disappointment. Social courage is about showing up as a whole person and also making it safe for others to show up. And finally, creative courage is the courage to come up with creative solutions, to take the risk to create community, to create meaning from challenges, to create new visions, and to create change that moves us forward in our humanity. So all of these actions, all of these interchanges are related to courage. And our truth is our innate belief of what is right and wrong. And it takes courage to speak our truth. Now, this is something that introverts know very well. Speaking out, speaking publicly is difficult. It's also something extroverts experience. Now, they may fill the airways, but may not fill the airways with their truth. Now, courage, I believe, is a muscle that starts with small moments out of the spotlight where only you are there to judge. It begins when you first consciously exercise courage in the face of fear and choose to provide, for example, honest feedback or raise a previously undiscussable issue or put forward an idea different than any currently being discussed. And you take both cognizance and credit for your work. You consciously recognize your decision to act courageously, and you allow yourself to take pride in building your muscle. Without that conscious act, and without that acknowledgement of the positive results, it's like it never happened. So building that courage muscle is as much is related to how much you practice, how much you consciously use courage, how much you exercise and build your courage muscle. The practice compounds like interest over the long run and builds your stock of courage. The stock of courage you'll need when confronting the big moments in your career. If you consistently exercise courage on a small scale and push yourself gradually to higher levels, your stock of courage will be high when you need it. I don't believe there are any instant hero formulas. So fear and doubt can subsume courage. Fear and doubt are simultaneously a leader's two greatest allies and at the same time, two greatest enemies. As an ally, fear can provide self-awareness, a sense of urgency and information. And doubt forms the core of scientific objectivity and learning, yet both can be enemies. In contrast, with fear can paralyze us from making a decision about what is right or wrong. And doubt can paralyze us as well. There is no action. Fear as an enemy floods our prefrontal cortex, that thinking part of our brain. And the light seen in the MRI of that prefrontal cortex goes dark. Fear shuts it down. We don't have access to it. We don't develop tunnel vision, lose sight of creativity and possibilities in favor of well-developed habits. Our hormones prepare us for flight, fight, paralysis, and flocking. Now, you know about fight, you become hostile and aggressive, and you know about flight, you storm out of the room or you hang up. You know about freezing, which is a response to an instinctive prey response, like a deer caught in the headlights. But flocking might be something new, a new concept. And it's a reaction to fear and stress that leads to groupthink and exclusion. I have this idea that I want to express, but everybody else has a different idea, so I go with the flock. We need fear and doubt as an ally as we face an unprecedented crisis like COVID-19 that requires rapid, real-time innovation through new learning. Learning our way forward is the antithesis of fear and doubt. Be not afraid does not mean we cannot have fear. Everyone has fear, and the people who embrace the call to leadership often find fear abounding. Instead, we do not need to be the fear we have. Now, fear can be contagious and have an exponential effect. The author Nigel Hamilton writes in The Mantle of Command about FDR, said, quote, "A leader must exhibit confidence since the slightest hint of anxiety or dejection would spread like ripples in a pond," close quote. So our question is, how do we build our courage muscle that is necessary to make fear and doubt an ally? And that we have the confidence that doesn't reveal the hint of anxiety or dejection as we face a crisis. So I'd like to take a minute here before we move to the next stop on our tour to find out if there are any questions. Any questions, Jennifer?
Hi, Bob. We don't have any questions yet, but we do have a couple of shout outs thanking you for hosting this webinar today. And especially we have someone, Megan. Megan says hello. I'll share her comments later. She says, so excited to listen to you. Thought you had retired. We first met at the Department of the Interior Office of Inspector General, now proudly serve as the Assistant Inspector General for Investigations with the National Science Foundation.
Well, congratulations. Congratulations, Megan. I'm so pleased that your career has advanced so far since I think we were together in the mid-'80s.
So the only other thing we have right now, we'll continue to encourage people to share comments and questions. Let me double check to see if anyone else has submitted anything. We don't have any hand raises right now. We have one housekeeping tip for you. And that's if you could turn your pages more quietly. I think it's hitting your microphone. So to turn them a little more gently so that it doesn't give a little feedback on the microphone. It'll make it easier for the recording.
I'll do it.
We do have one question. Will you talk a little bit about followership? And then we have another question that if you could go over what VAEs are again.
Values, assumptions, beliefs, and expectations. And I'm going to be speaking about them a lot more at our next stop. Followership is a whole different issue. Do I have the courage? It's interrelated, because if I'm going to be an effective follower, the question is, do I have the courage to speak my truth to my boss or my boss's boss? And this whole presentation is about courage and developing courage and making choices rather than automatic responses. And so, as an effective follower, I have to first develop courage, and then I have to make a choice about whether I'm going to use that courage in relation to my boss or my boss's boss or others. Okay, let's go to the next stop. Courage and the authentic self. Building our courage muscle starts with our struggle to discover our authentic self. Now, the question is, am I operating with the values, assumptions, beliefs, and expectations I have consciously chosen? Or am I operating with the VAEs I have unconsciously adopted? So it starts with a willingness to understand that my view of the world is limited by my prism, just like everybody else's view of the world. It's limited by their prism. It's how I see the world. So if you can think of the fact that we, every second, as we're looking around, there are about 8 million impressions that come into our brain, and we only process about 40 of those impressions. So what our brain does is filter those impressions consistent with our prism. So we see the world through our prism. Our mindset is represented by this prism metaphor, and our prism determines the limitations of what we see and how we behave. In this state, our VAEs can drive our behavior either reactively, automatically, unconsciously, or we can take action to act consciously. When our VAEs are formed from our childhood lessons learned or from societal cultures, they are unconscious unless we consciously adopt them. So, is this you? If I'm subject to my VAEs, they have me because I act without thinking, without really knowing what my VAEs are, which means I'm making decisions based on my reactive tendency. My inner life is contained inside my self-created box, inside my self-created prism. I never think outside the limits of my reactive tendencies or outside my self-created box. As a result, I'm unable to be creative beyond my reactive tendencies box. So, for example, for all of you who live in the Washington, D.C. area, or those of you who have driven in the Washington, D.C. area, or in any other place where there's incredible traffic, people driving fast and cutting in and out, I ask if you have ever had an experience while driving in that situation when you were cut off and you engaged in behavior that, if filmed, you would not want shown to small children, particularly your small children. It's a quintessential example of automatic behavior. I might have a value that I'm going to consider my responses, but in that situation, you did not consider your response. So that's just an example. And it exemplifies that a leader's challenge is to move more of the unknown subject to objects where I can see my values, assumptions, beliefs, and expectations, and where I can see what is driving my behavior. Or is this you? If I take the time to ask myself which of my VAEs are driving my behavior, I can see my mind. So it becomes an object. I then have the option to change my unconscious reactive response and make a conscious response. I can change my value, assumption, belief, or expectation and take a different path. Or I can consciously choose to confirm my childhood value. In that case, I make a conscious decision. I own it. It is now object. It is moved from inside my brain that I don't know anything about to outside. I can look at it, it becomes object, and I can make a choice. My choice then reflects who I am, not what I unconsciously learned from someone else. I own it. I'm invested in it. A very simple example that I experienced was as I grew up in Detroit and Ann Arbor, Michigan in the 50s and early 60s, American-made cars were the king. And I grew up on a street where every single person who lived on that street worked in one of the three automobile companies, Ford, Chrysler, or GM. And so, like all of the kids on the block, every year there was all of these automobile companies put out new models, and we were always looking to see if we could be the first one to spot one of the new models before they came to the sales showroom. And of course, during that period, the bigger the fin, the better. So I never thought of looking at buying a foreign car. I never looked at an ad in a magazine or on the TV about a foreign car. I only knew American cars, and everything else I assumed was bad. So my self-awareness increased when I was able to see my false assumptions. And my false assumptions, I saw them when I bought a Dodge Dart in the early 70s, and it fell apart within 6 months after I bought it. And at that time, there were no real warranties. And I took it back, and I took it back, and I took it back. And finally, after 18 months, I was looking for a different car. And I thought, well, maybe I ought to look and see about these foreign cars. So I did some research, gathered some data, and went to a Honda showroom very tentatively and with an attitude, show me. Well, they did. I drove the car, and I've been driving Hondas ever since. So through my own questioning, through my gathering of data, I was able to make my automatic response of buy American, and I changed my response to buying something else. I had to unlearn what was automatic and relearn a new response, something that is very, very hard for all of us to do. But I will say that the more we challenge our own VAEs or allow others to challenge our VAEs, the better we get at expanding our box, at expanding our prism. It proves to be like a muscle that we can strengthen the more we exercise it. We have greater power to choose, even when we have strong emotional reactions to situations and people. We have the opportunity to increase our self-awareness. We create courage. So how do I access my authentic self? I think courage comes from a deep trust in our conscious self, a deep trust rooted in profound self-knowledge. Now, to access my full authentic self, I have to recognize my inner life runs my outer life. If we are willing to allow what happens outside, in my case, my Dodge falling apart, to flow in to my inner life, acknowledge it, Dodge cars are crummy, and integrate it, our prism expands. Our new inner life, Dodges are bad, Hondas are good, will drive a different set of VAEs, conscious VAEs that I've considered and adopted as my own. Similarly, I also have to have the courage to give my heart access to the reality of my passions, my vulnerability, and my heartbreak. I have to feel those emotions, acknowledge them, and integrate them into my inner life and expanding my prism. If I follow this path of checking my inner life for VAEs in my heart, it's like connecting with a source of energy. It's where your authentic self generates the courage to be present and the courage to stay present. It's how we remain present in difficult conversations without becoming aggressive or withdrawing. When we truly know our consciousness and our truly understand our VAEs, we can trust ourselves. We are not surprised by our unconscious reactive behavior. We are in the business of creating courage. All right, Jennifer, do we have any questions now?
We're opening up for questions. Does anyone have any questions, or are there any courageous souls out there who would like to share their voice? Nothing yet. I think everyone is wrapped with attention, Bob.
Hopefully so.
We have 94 participants. So we are all here, and I think we're ready to keep moving forward. What will happen is, if anyone is so inspired and has a question or a comment to share, I'll come back in and let you know.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Our next stop is courage and community. It's a fact that our community can also help our courage muscle develop. So becoming more authentic and trustworthy requires both individual introspection, which is what we've been talking about, and a supportive community. Leaders have to discover how to invite people into a co-created, trustworthy space so they can support each other and the leader as they work together. Now, achieving effective collaboration requires a genuine, trustworthy community that creates the courage to be authentic. So relational trust is a specific form of trust that arises from interpersonal relationships between people on a team, in a network, in an organization, or in a community. A leader who's really interested in the led showing up with courage to speak their truth has a responsibility to create and hold a safe container where relationship trust can occur and courage is generated. So a leader's role is to nurture trustworthy conditions and be willing to take part as a learner, one who does not know all of the answers.
Bob, this just in. We have a hot question for you.
All right, let's do it.
How can we begin to see our own assumptions?
It's hard, but a way to see our own assumptions is to ask ourselves, so why did we behave as we just behaved? What value, what assumption, what belief, what expectation drove that behavior? So for me, with my example about buying cars, my assumption, my belief, my value was that American cars were good and there was nothing else to consider. So I automatically, when I was looking for a car, went on either the new or the used car lot, and that's what I bought without a thought, without any data gathering. And even though my Dodge was falling apart, it really didn't occur to me that it was because of anything other than maybe this car was bad. Not that American cars were declining in terms of their production values and in terms of their safety and so forth. It wasn't until I asked myself, so why are you not thinking about anything else? Why is your vision so much like a tunnel? When I could ask myself that question, I could say, oh yeah, I haven't thought about anything else. I only think about one thing. So if I can ask that question, or if someone else asks me a question, instead of giving my automatic response, I say, I wonder why I've given that automatic response for so long and with such certainty. Maybe I ought to rethink it. And if I can rethink it, I can say, yeah, I got it right, and I'll continue to get it right. Or I can say, no, it's time to change. The value that was good in the past that drove my behavior is a value that I have to change and take a different path. So really the root of this exploration are, what are my values, assumptions, beliefs, and expectations? Because those drive my behavior. So if the person who asks the question has a follow-up, I'll be happy to do that, or otherwise I'll go forward. So I'll just wait just a couple of seconds to see if there's a follow-up.
We do. She doesn't have a follow-up question, but we do have someone who raised their hand. Would you like to hear from them at this point?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, we lost them. Okay. So hopefully they'll raise their hand again at our next opportunity. Thanks so much, Bob.
So here, I tried to create some leader behaviors, some leader actions that might help build that safe container I was talking about. And this is not an exhaustive list. This is not a total list, but it is a list that you might give some thought to. And the first is give and receive welcome. Now, if I'm the leader and I'm sitting at the conference room table, looking at my iPhone or rifling through papers as you come in and sit down and I don't acknowledge you, that's one way to set the tone for a meeting. If I wait for everyone to arrive and then I'm the last to arrive and assume my place at the table, that's another way to set the tone of a meeting. Another way is to sit at the table and welcome people as they come in. Making eye contact and saying hello. Ensuring that there are enough chairs. I think this form of invitation, this form of greeting, creates a different set of expectations for the meeting that I'm going to be leading. It reduces anxiety. It creates relationships before the meeting starts. I think a leader can also model presence. Despite all that's happening in my life right now, despite how busy I am, if I am focused on our work together at this moment to the best of my ability that inspires the same response from those you lead. All too often, I attend meetings at agencies where half the group are looking at their cell phone. I don't think without interpersonal presence that we can really, truly address the difficult problems the difficult, complex problems that we're facing in the world today. Now, that people look at their cell phones might be because they're bored or because they've heard everything before. There are a lot of reasons why they do it, but I only point out that the most productive meetings are those where everyone is present, everyone is engaged, everyone is focused on the problem, everyone is focused on the solution, and through that presence, courage develops and people are better able to speak their truth. I think it makes a difference whether a leader extends an invitation to speak or demands someone to speak. When someone demands me to speak, I'm already, the hair on the back of my neck is already standing up. I'm already feeling a little bit angry, and that prefrontal cortex is half lit rather than fully lit. Speak your truth in a way that respects others' truth. If I speak my truth in a way that is a declaration, because I use an I statement, as opposed to a decision, I'm going to generate a response from those I lead. If I speak my truth in terms of blame or right, I'm right, you're wrong, I'm never going to engender the kind of a relationship in a meeting where people engage with me. But I ask you to imagine a place where your contribution is respected and heard. That's the goal. Refrain from trying to fix each other. Inviting the soul, and that's really what we're inviting when we ask people to show up with their authentic self. Inviting the soul to show up in order to solve a social problem is to scare it away when we try to fix the other person. If we try to turn the conversation from counsel to curiosity, from invasiveness to inquiry, the authentic self of the follower is more likely to show up. This next one, when the going gets tough, turn to wonder, is I make this statement, but for me, it's difficult. Asking myself when someone makes a statement, I wonder what brought you to this belief, as opposed to an automatic response. Did you do your homework? Where's the data? Or I wonder what he or she is feeling right now. I don't understand it, as opposed to making a judgment and making a statement. I wonder what my reaction teaches me about myself. You know, it's easy to it's easy to focus on blaming the other, but what does it tell me about myself? So the goal is to turn to wonder about you or the other person's reaction so that you intentionally set aside judging either the statement or the person and are present enough to listen. By wondering about what's going on inside someone else, you are being generous to the other. And another thing a leader can do is to trust and learn from silence. giving people some time and a little bit of space to think about an answer rather than insisting on an immediate answer can give those introverts some time to respond and those extroverts some time to be quiet. Now, this is another list of leader actions that model relational trust building. And one of the most obvious, and I think one of the most critical, is respect. And it's easy to say and often not put into practice. But honoring the role each person plays in the workplace and the mutual dependency of team leaders, I think, is a measure of respect. It's one thing to ensure that all are heard. It is another to ensure that each is valued. And I think that's a critical component of respect. And a second is personal regard. When a more powerful person makes a conscious commitment to relieve uncertainty or unease, it creates a sense of being cared for. If I express as a leader concern about a person's personal life, about creating professional development opportunities or extending their role beyond what is normally expected, I show I care. And the third is competence. And this is not in reference to performance. Rather, it's the leader's willingness to create, model, and facilitate compliance with a co-created set of group norms. I recommend to every leader to create a set of group norms and then to take on the role and responsibility of ensuring compliance with those group norms. It creates in reliability-based trust, and it creates a safe space where people can develop vulnerability-based trust. And finally, integrity, the ability of followers to make sense of their work together in terms of what they understand as their primary collective purpose. Why are we here? What are we doing? And how does our action together align with our mission?
Bob?
Yes.
We have a really nice question from Christine. Christine asks, what are leader actions to build a safe container necessary for courage in the present space of social distancing? And then she has a follow-up, especially if there hasn't been development of the safe container before now.
I think in light of social distancing, it's more difficult because you can get fewer people in a space. And I think it's more difficult online, on Zoom, than it is sitting face to face. But it's no less important. In fact, I think it's more important. And the only way I would suggest is to acknowledge the difficulty, but the importance of the work. It is difficult to create a set of group norms online. It is difficult to carry out the actions that I've just described because in an online telephonic, where it's most difficult, or in a Zoom meeting where at least you can see others, because so much of our actions are in response to visual cues. So if we don't have those visual cues when we're on the phone, it's even harder for us to take the risk to speak our truth. And yet, unless we're able to speak our truth, we underutilize what we have to offer to the group. So I think for the leader, if the leader wants to maximize everybody's contribution, if the leader wants to have those led to speak their truth, then there needs to be an investment in creating that safe container. And the only way I know how to do it is to say that it's difficult, to say that it's necessary, and identify the rationale about why it's necessary.
That's great, Bob. We have one more for you.
Okay.
When the going gets tough, do you have some tips for how to remind yourself to set aside judging instead of use wonder?
Oftentimes the only way you think about that is after it happens. It's sort of like when you're in a meeting and someone asks you a question and you can't think of a response, and then you walk out of the room and you say, damn, if only I could have said this. It would be a smart, clear, thoughtful response, but it's too late. The meeting's over, you're out of the room. So I think that the only way that or not the only way, but one way I can increase that courage muscle and not make judgments is if I reflect back on the meeting after the meeting. And I say to myself, oh yeah, I didn't express wonder. I didn't express wonder. Why didn't I? What led me not to express wonder? What in myself led me to not express wonder? What value, assumption, belief, or expectation led me to snap out an answer and jump over wonder? If I can do that, if I can reflect back on the meeting, if I can understand my own behavior, if I can then practice by unlearning, saying to myself, I'm going to work on unlearning and acting differently, then the next time a similar situation occurs, I have a chance, no guarantee, but I have a chance at expressing wonder rather than judgment.
Thanks, Bob. We have a great suggestion that I'll bring up during the Q&A discussion portion.
Okay. So our next stop is developing the courage to hold our tension and stay engaged. And when we can do that, it adds more to our courage muscle. So when faced with tension, represented by that one last string, I once was in a grocery store, and there was a mom and a little kid who was screaming and shouting at her mom, and the mom calmly looked down and said, Sally, you are on my nerves and plucking at the last one. And so when I saw this image, it reminded me of that situation. That woman held on to her tension. She didn't shout at the kid, but explained clearly and explicitly what was going on with her. And the question is, when faced with tension, whether it's a long-standing unresolved question or someone's sudden unexpected behavior, we have a choice. We can react based on our unconscious VAEs, or we can respond by holding the tension in a calm way and choose a wholehearted response that includes an examination of our VAEs and avoiding the fight, flight, freezing, or flocking response. So the goal here is I feel the tension, I hold the tension, and then I make a conscious rather than an unconscious response. Holding tension doesn't mean avoiding it or being frozen with indecision. Think of tension as an opportunity to open my mind and my heart so they don't shatter. They have an opportunity to expand my prism. Holding tension is an inner process that means knowing and making your VAEs and emotions object so you can make a choice. So, do I have the courage to hold on to the one remaining thread as I venture into the unknown? So, do I have the courage to reflect? Now, stopping is hard. Staying stopped is even harder. Building a courage muscle occurs when we stop to reflect before we take action. Are we willing to stop and learn? The essence of reflection is learning who I am. Do I have the courage to look into my subject brain where I've been stashing my dirt, confront that long-standing unresolved tension, or just look and see what is in there to discover? What is needed, what I need to discover to make object. It's hard to learn about who I am while I'm talking with others, driving in traffic, herding my kids, or at my stage, my grandkids. It requires solitude. It requires time to think alone. Now, the techniques are well known: journaling, meditation, sitting and letting my mind wander. But the question is, will I stop and take the time to learn about myself? So, here are some final thoughts. I suggest not this, but this. Cowardice asks the question, is it safe? Expediency asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? But conscience, my values, assumptions, beliefs, and expectations asks the question, is it right? And there comes a time one must take a position that is neither safe, nor politic, nor popular, but one must take it simply because it's right. So our challenge is, am I consciously every day building my courage muscle to simply do it because it is right? And my final question is, assuming you do attend to building that courage muscle that you are seeking to develop, what would you do with more courage? How would you apply it? So I'm eager to have your questions.
Hi, Bob. Thanks so much. We have a question and a suggestion. One of the questions is, what are some first action steps I could take if I want to start identifying my VAEs?
So I think a first step would be to just take some time to identify first your values and identify them all. And then take a look at them and say, what are the 5 most important values that I have? What are they? And then take a look at them first to say, are they actual or are they aspirational? So, for example, I might say to myself that my value is to be open and available to new ideas from those that I lead. And then you might say to yourself, well, how open am I when my boss assigns a task that will take 3 days and I tell my team it's got to be done in 1 day? How open am I to the ideas of those on my team? So the first step is to identify 5 or 6 values that you have, test to see whether they're actual, whether they're aspirational, or whether they're both. Because really, what you're doing is trying to find out for yourself what your values actually are. And I think the only way you can do that is by listing them and then testing them over a period of time. How do I really behave against that value? And as you're testing, you can say to yourself, wow, is that really my value? Or is that my value 10% of the time? Or are there other values that I find more important? If I'm consciously thinking about what my values are that drive my behavior, I have a real chance at making a decision. Yeah, that's me. That's my actual behavior. Or no, it isn't. I behave differently than the way I have thought when I listed those values. And you can do the same thing with assumptions, expectations, and beliefs. Write them down and test them over a period of time to see if they really are what you think they are. Do they really drive your behavior, or is it something else? And through that inquiry, I think you have a much better shot at understanding what's automatic and which of those you have adopted as your own.
That's great. Thank you so much, Bob. We also have another question. Because we have different prisms, sometimes it isn't always clear what is right. What suggestions do you have to explore those situations?
Well, I first have to decide what's right from my point of view. But that doesn't mean it is right. But I do have to decide based on my values, assumptions, beliefs, and expectations, what is right. And then I get to test that and should test it with the perceptions of others, which again, if I'm open, if I'm available, I get a chance to have others with different perspectives to challenge my values, assumptions, beliefs, and expectations. If I'm open, I can say with clarity and with certainty what I believe, and they can do the same. Now, just because I believe it right doesn't mean that it's right or that it's going to be adopted, but what it does mean is that I am showing up authentically.
Thank you. We have a request. Christine Anthony says that it would be helpful if you talked about developing group norms for teams, especially on conference calls as a leader. So developing those norms as a leader for these conference calls. We're all pivoting to a virtual teleworking environment. And I'd like to hear some thoughts that you might have on how to manage that.
Well, I believe that a leader has to explain. If there's a problem, the leader has to name the problem clearly so that everyone understands from the leader's perspective what the problem is. And the leader can easily say, because I think it's true for every leader, we're moving. We used to be next door to be each other. We used to be able to stand up over the cube. We used to go to the conference room, but now we can't. And that creates a special group of problems because of our distance. And besides that, I've been thinking over the last few months that there might be situations, there might be behaviors that were not productive. So I would like to suggest that we create a set of group norms that we all agreed to abide by. And the process I'd like to use is for all of us to think about situations that have occurred in our meetings in the past, which, if we had a ground rule governing it, wouldn't occur again. And I'd like you to think into the future, at least, about what this distancing is, what kind of problems this distancing is going to create. And based on that, what are the behaviors that you need to make our meetings effective and to identify them? We'll have a discussion. We'll create this set of group norms. And we'll abide by them. And I'll serve as a facilitator of this meeting and remind people of the norms. But these norms will govern our behavior, whether we meet in person at some time in the future, whether we have telephone calls, or whether we do Zoom, in order to help us develop our reliability-based trust. Because when we have reliability-based trust, we know and expect how people are going to relate to each other. And the goal will be to develop our vulnerability-based trust so that we will say the things that heretofore might have been difficult to each other, but that will hasten our solution to the complex problems we face.
Thank you so much, Bob. I think that's all we have for now. If there are any last closing thoughts that the community would like to share, any burning questions, or if anyone would like to share their voice, please go ahead and let us know. In the meantime, while you're thinking about those questions, Bob, we have a request for any books or reading suggestions you have for this process or just for the current time.
Well, the 4 books that I mentioned at the beginning on that slide, and those slides will be available, I think, when this is posted. I think starting there with any one of those books is a good place to start. And I just want to thank all of you for the work that you do in this very, very difficult time. And I want to thank you for coming together today. So thank you very much.